Hi everyone, welcome to our overview of refrigeration measures. It's now 2 p.m., so let's get started. My name is Portia Balbad and I'm the marketing manager for the Enerva and Summerhill team. Enerva and Summerhill are supporting Emission Reduction Alberta with the design and execution of the Energy Savings for Business program. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started, let's go over a few housekeeping items. There are quite a few people attending today's webinar. As such, all microphones have been muted to avoid interruptions. Throughout the presentation, you can submit questions to our team through the control panel's question feature. We'll answer those questions during our Q&A period at the end of today's webinar. If you can't resolve your technical issues or need to leave early, we'll be posting a recording of this webinar on the ESB program website. It'll include both the presentation and the Q&A session. Today we'll begin with a brief program overview, including eligible measure categories. We'll then review eligible refrigeration technologies, program requirements, and review the application process. Our team will also go through incentive considerations before ending the presentation with a Q&A period. Today, Luca Youngin, Emission Reduction Alberta's Program Manager, will provide a little background on the ERA and the Energy Savings for Business program. Then my colleagues Patrick McMahon and Soria Narcia will jump in to guide us through eligible refrigeration measures. So let's get right to it. Here's Luca to kick off today's presentation.
Thanks, Portia. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions while supporting the economy benefits everyone. ERA's vision is anchored in the belief that our success is measured in both economic and environmental terms. Emissions Reduction Alberta has been investing in Alberta technologies and companies since 2009 to reduce emissions and grow Alberta's economy. Our investments help innovators develop and demonstrate GHG reducing technologies that lower costs, improve competitiveness, and accelerate Alberta's transformation towards decarbonization. We have worked across many sectors and have recently broadened our scope with Energy Savings for Business. This program will accelerate the adoption of commercially available technologies that will help businesses cut costs and reduce emissions. Learning from previous programs with similar scope, we have adapted the program to be more streamlined. We know time is money to Alberta businesses and are committed to fast turnaround times. The program has been designed to reflect the realities of the pandemic. Incentive payments will be made electronically, and all program materials are available in a digital, downloadable format that can be easily printed by contractors or participants. We have also expanded the measures list to include categories that have not been offered previously, such as geothermal and compressed air. We have also made sure to include measures that are accessible to all businesses, like ceiling and wall insulation, efficient motors, lighting systems, and high-efficiency windows. We'll have over 300 measures to offer in this program. Today's category of measures are effective ways to save on energy and maintain proper temperature. For example, strip curtains won't impede movement through a facility, but can stop cold air from escaping better than traditional exits. We'll continue to host more events like this one to help guide contractors and applicants through the program. If you missed any of the past webinars, we will post them on our website. To register for future webinars or view recordings of past webinars, please visit eralberta.ca/ESB. Before we get into the details of today's webinar, we wanted to share a quick note about the application process. We're seeing incomplete applications submitted in order to secure funding reservations. Submitting an incomplete application does not secure funding. If a pre-project application is submitted but is not approved, it does not hold a place in line for the incentive reservation. The incentive is only reserved after the pre-project application is approved. It is important to submit good quality applications with complete documentations, or the review cannot occur in a timely manner. If the application is incomplete or is missing key information, it creates delays in the review and approval process, and it will be returned to you for more information. With that said, we're glad you could join us today to review refrigeration measures. I will now pass it off to Patrick and Surya to take you through how to apply for this category of incentives.
Thanks for that context, Luca. I'm Patrick McMahon, the Contractor Experience Manager on the Enerva Summerhill team. We're proud to support Emissions Reduction Alberta through the delivery of the Energy Savings for Business program. For those on the line, thank you for calling into the webinar today, and thanks for your interest in the program. Today's webinar will cover measures identified under the refrigeration measure category. We'll provide some context on each of the measure types, including a review of indicative components of the application process. Then, as Portia mentioned, We'll share some advice around the incentive maximums and minimums and how that might impact applications that are submitted. We'll get started with the automatic door closure measure. My colleague, Surya Narcia, will be joining us and to help me contextualize the measures today, and will highlight program eligibility criteria along with application requirements. Surya, for automatic door closures, how much of an energy saving opportunity can these present?
Thanks, Patrick. Happy to help for sure. Hello, everyone. A lot of energy is spent in maintaining cold or sub-zero temperatures in coolers and freezers, especially the walk-in types, where every time the door is open, there is a significant amount of infiltration of warm air from the surroundings. And this results in extra energy usage to keep the space cool. Automatic door closing solutions reduce the volume of unnecessary heat gain from the open freezer or cooler doors, thus avoiding the necessity for the compressors to run to recondition those replaced warm air. In addition to that, it doesn't have the, it doesn't impede the worker to if the worker is coming out with a handsful of products, it doesn't have to worry about closing the door behind themselves. Automatic door closers are eligible for this program to participate so long as they're applied to an existing walk-in cooler or freezer, and the door closer being installed is either hydraulic or spring-loaded. And when adding the measures, the users will need to provide the specification sheet for the choice of the door closer, the dimensions of the doorway, and the volume of the refrigerated space behind the door.
Now we're moving on to evaporator fan controls. Surya, can you tell me what these are? Where do we find them, and how do they save energy?
Sure. You would commonly find evaporator fans running all the time in many coolers or freezers. But the reality is they don't need to run all the time. They can slow down or stop when the compressor stops after the temperature set point is reached in that space. So this can be achieved by an evaporator fan controller, which monitors the refrigerant flow or sometimes the compressor drive motor current, and then reduces the speed of the fan when the compressor goes off. This is very useful in walk-in coolers and freezers. You will also appreciate the fact that with slower evaporator fan motors, there will be less heat that is released into the space, which can further reduce the compressor runtime. So it's a double opportunity to save energy here. To be eligible for the program, the controls must be installed in existing coolers and freezers on existing motors. And the control system must be able to also slow down the motors in addition to on-off control. For a successful submission of an application of these measures to the program, the participant or the contractor will need to provide the specification sheets of the new system. They also need to provide information about the age of the evaporators, the areas they are serving, and the horsepower rating of their fan motors.
Thanks for that. Up next is the strip curtain measure. What is a strip curtain and how do they save energy?
A strip curtain is a very simple accessory for a refrigerated space, but it is very effective in slowing the infiltration of warm air from the surroundings into the cool space. It's a natural tendency for warm air to move around and move towards the colder region. Therefore, the strip curtain acts as a barrier to that. It avoids the overall temperature in the cooler or freezer space to rise, and thus avoiding unnecessary running of the compressors, and thereby saving electricity. The effectiveness of a strip curtain in a walk-in cooler or freezer is actually mostly during the times of the day when the door has to be kept open for moving stuffs in and out of the space. For successful submission of these measures to the program, the participant or the contractor will need to ensure the installation of the curtain is for an existing cooler or freezer where currently there is no such barrier, or if the existing barrier is not effective anymore. And during the application process, you will need to provide some details, namely the dimensions of the doorway, the volume of the refrigerated space, and the age of the compressors that are serving these specific areas.
Moving right along, the next refrigeration measure is the anti-sweat heater controls. Surya, can you explain what are ASH controllers? How do they operate to save energy, and where do we typically find them?
Of course, ASH controllers, that's a short form of, we call them. Have you ever noticed in grocery stores, when you walk by a display cooler or a freezer, you cannot actually see inside because of the condensation on the doors? You need to open to be able to check the products inside.
Yeah, I can picture it now.
Well, this is actually condensation of accumulated humidity within these cases. So to avoid this, equipment manufacturers typically install electric heaters on the doors and the frames to keep them warm and thus avoiding those condensation. These ASH controllers, they do a great job, but they actually don't need to stay on all the time and consuming electricity. So if you can install controllers that would automatically turn them off when there is little or no risk of condensation, you will save important amount of electricity in the long run. Those controllers, the way they work is they measure temperature and humidity of the air inside the case, and then would activate the door heater when humidity rises beyond a certain set point. In this process, electricity savings are achieved in two ways. One is from the reduced operation of the heaters themselves, and secondly, because they run for short periods of time, there is less heat dissipation in the area of the cases inside, and therefore the compressors would also have to, they can run less to cool that space. You don't need to run for longer hours. In terms of the program eligibility, to be successful, you will have the participant or the contractor will need to ensure that the controllers are well equipped with the humidity sensors. It's very simple. And to submit an application, we will need to receive the specification sheets. We will need to know the kilowatt rating of the existing heaters. And you will also need to provide the age and the type of the display case.
Now we're moving into the last measure in the refrigeration category, night covers. Surya, can you explain what these are and where to find them?
Absolutely. You would have noticed when walking into grocery stores that there are open cases all over the place. As I'm sure you can imagine that these are also energy hogs as they are open to the atmosphere. And there's always a continuous movement of warm air across the top that is continuously coming inside the case. So while store operators have to leave them open during the day for customers to have easy access to the product, they can actually cover them during the night to prevent the heat loss through convective heat transfer. So the hot air doesn't keep moving in the night when you're not needing them. And this certainly helps in reducing the compressor operation. And in addition to that, if the cover is large enough to fit over the whole case, it acts as an insulator and reduces heat loss through conduction. To be eligible for the program to receive incentive, the participant or the contractor will need to ensure that the application is for an open case only. And these cases are used for at least 25% of the day, and they're not required during the night. During the application process, in addition to the standard specification sheets that we always request, you will also need to provide details on the cases, such as the age, their temperature classification, low temp or high temp, the length of the case, and also you have to mention if there are vertical cases or the horizontal cases.
Thanks, Surya. We'll take the opportunity here to showcase the process to add a measure to the pre-approval project application. We've selected the Evaporator Fan Control to showcase an indicative application. Application requirements for the refrigeration measures are few and relatively straightforward, as Surya has described. Adding a measure can be completed by the participant, the building owner or leaseholder, or at the participant's discretion, they can enable their eligible contractor to complete this component of the application process. The addition of a measure starts on step 4 of the pre-application process by clicking the Add Measure button at the top of the web page. All of today's measures will be associated with the refrigeration measure category, and for this example, we'll follow the drop-downs for Evaporator Fan Control. When the specific measure is selected, the form expands to identify the balance of the measure-specific information required to add the measure to the application. This is an indicative example of the evaporator fan controls to showcase how the measure requirements will be collected. The measure-specific information starts with the quantity of similar measures being added. The specification sheet of the product intended to be installed is required and can be provided by dragging the file into the gray area or clicking to prompt the opportunity to explore to find the file and upload it. The area served by or conditioned by the evaporators being controlled in square feet is required, as is the age of the evaporators in years and the horsepower of the evaporator motors. You'll see the per unit emissions reductions is pre-populated based on the specific measure that's been selected. The total emissions reduction reflects an estimate based on the measure-specific variables entered through the measure addition module that have just been covered in the last slide, and it will be calculated when the user ultimately clicks on Get Calculated Values. The balance of inputs required to complete this measure addition include costs, divided between equipment and material costs, labor costs, and design costs. When multiple measures will be included on a single application, costs such as labor for installation or eligible design or audit costs should be allocated across the various measures on the application. When this is necessary, it will be helpful as a tip to share how costs were allocated in a simple summary document added at step 5 in the application process. That's the step where documents about the whole project are added. Please note that labor costs should only reflect costs associated with the installation of the measure, while other costs, excluding equipment and material costs, should be allocated to the design cost field. In addition to this, where measures are being installed by staff of the participant, labor costs are not considered an eligible cost. The rebate application will also calculate 3 values relating to the incentive, and they'll be calculated when the Get Calculated Values button is ultimately clicked. Understanding these values in the context of the program may be helpful. The first is the measure incentive, which is the per unit incentive multiplied by the quantity of measures being added through this specific measure addition. The maximum eligible measure incentive reflects the incentive cap applied to the sum of all eligible costs. For example, if the sum of costs was $100,000 and the incentive cap was defined as 50%, the maximum eligible measure incentive would calculate to $50,000. The total eligible measure incentive is the lower of either the maximum eligible measure incentive or the measure incentive. These values will calculate after the Get Calculated Values button is clicked, and the application will identify any missing fields. Take this opportunity to review the measures set to be added for accuracy before clicking to add the measure to the application. This process from adding measures, defining costs, and review is repeated for other measures to be included as a part of the project at the facility, included in a single application for incentive approval. I appreciate that these terms could be a bit confusing, so let's take a look at the incentive calculations with an example from the refrigeration category. A grocery store is looking to install anti-sweat heater controllers on their cooler and freezer display cases. As a requirement of the program, their application must result in an incentive of at least $1,000. Let's see how incentive values will be calculated and how a participant will satisfy the minimum incentive value for an application. On a per door basis, the cost of equipment and labor creates a total cost for an installed ASH controller of $625. In this example, the potential measure incentive is $400 per door. The maximum eligible measure incentive will be based on the 50% incentive cap, considering the $625 of eligible costs. This calculates to $312.50 on a per door basis. Since the maximum eligible measure incentive is lower than the potential measure incentive, The total eligible measure incentive is the value associated with the incentive cap, the maximum eligible measure incentive. When applied on a per door basis, this is $312.50. In order to submit an application that results in an incentive of $1,000 or greater, the grocery store will need to install at least 4 ASH controllers or could evaluate other measures for more energy savings and associated incentives, maybe night covers or even lighting. The target takeaway here is that understanding incentive limits, both minimums and maximums, will help all participants, including contractors and building owners or leaseholders, leverage program opportunities and streamline their experience with the program.